Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 2, Conceptual Analysis of Peace and Conflict. Let us have introduction about the unit. The terms peace and conflict are paired opposites, like light and shadow and many other such paired opposites. However, there is one very important difference between peace and conflict on the one hand and light and shadow on the other. In the case of the latter pair, there is no doubt as to which comes first, for it is light that comes first, producing the shadow. This cannot be said of peace and conflict with any certainty. Ordinary talk of peace only follows in the context of pre-existence of violence or conflict. There may be praise or benediction for the prevalence of peace, and prescriptive norms come to the forefront when conflict and its external main manifestation constantly disturb the consciousness of a human being on the social order. The desire for peace and prayers for its prevalence and preservation has been the common theme of all spiritual or religious traditions since ancient times. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti is the refrain of Hindu prayers down from the Vedic times. Peace on earth and goodwill towards to all mankind constitutes the noble aspiration of the Semitic faiths, the Jewish, the Christian, and the Islamic alike. The quest for inner and external peace is the quintessential feature of Buddhism and Jainism. Even so, it can be questioned whether such invocations of peace are descriptions of the human condition, circumscribed by all around by human nature and even nature itself, or only prescriptions for the human beings to aim at. Theories about human nature and its propensity for peace and conflict are ridden with disagreements. Even on the basic question whether there is some true or innate nature of human beings, or there is no such essential human nature. There is no agreement among religious thinkers, philosophers, and psychologists. Thus, since time immemorial, when mankind began to reflect on human condition, the problems of peace and conflict have continuously posed a challenge to thinkers. One could even say that it is the all pervading presence of conflict that prompts the desire for peace and promotes the efforts for securing peace in human affairs. Significantly enough, corresponding to the invocation of peace, all spiritual traditions also recognize the counterforce of evil as a perennial problem in human existence. In Christian theology, this is called the problem of theodicy. Why should there be violence and suffering in the world? Why should this arise as much from human agency as from natural causes? Can this be overcome in the human conditions? Other religious and cultural traditions raised identical questions. All of us realize that these are the questions that go side by side with the ascriptions and prescriptions for peace on earth. It is not only the religious thinkers that were seized with this conflicting pair of peace and conflict. Even in secular thought, this problem occupies a central place. For example, in ancient India, the Lokayata theory that rejected the religious quest as irrelevant to the human condition grappled with the theme of the vows and tragedies of human beings' existence. Likewise, other philosophical traditions, while dismissing religious based explanations of evil, sin, and conflict, have all the same concentrated upon the human predicament of conflict and the prospects for peace in humanity's existence. With much of contemporary philosophy on the problems of peace and conflict, distancing itself from the religious explanation, secularization of thought in this field has become the primary paradigm. In this quest, anthropology, sociology, psychology, and political science have joined hands. One can go to the extent of saying that the secular school of thought replaced the spiritualist oriented explanation as the latter, in many cases, have come to be regarded as neither useful in ameliorating the conflict condition nor effective in bringing peace on earth. Some of the secular critics have gone beyond being skeptical about the spiritual standpoint. They hold religion and religious concerns themselves responsible for fostering conflict and thus acting as obstacles to peace. However, the scope of concern and the extent of diversity among the ideas relating to peace and conflict in the secularist paradigm are as varied and intense as they are in the religious discourse on the theme. The two concepts, peace and conflict, remain enmeshed, and it is difficult to identify which of the come first in the matrix of the human condition. Now let us discuss human nature. While human nature is too broad and too general an explanation of human behavior, a brief discussion does afford a good starting point to understand peace and conflict. Broadly, there are three views on human nature in the academic discipline of psychology, anthropology, sociology, and political science. These hold that human nature is essentially good and peaceful, essentially bad and aggressive, and transformed by social relationship. Though it is not possible to discuss the diverse aspects of these views, it is necessary at least to touch upon them briefly. The first one is human nature is essentially peaceful. The main source of this view lies in the fact that in all creation the human being is unique, endowed with a developed mind that is capable of thinking and knowing that it can think. The human being is also gifted to think in terms of good and bad. This is usually called the capacity for discrimination, by which the ethical sense inheres in the mankind. Qualities like altruism, doing good to others, sympathy for others in distress, and pity for the suffering of fellow creatures are quite naturally attributed to our nature as human beings. It is in the context of possessing these noble features that the human being is called the benign being. The notion of spirituality is strongly attached to this idea of the benign nature of the human being. Spirituality and its related idea of religion trace all creation to the divine power, holding that the human being occupies a special place in God's creation. And it is this special bond between the human and the divine that provides the foundation for the benign view of human nature. What is important to note is that all religious tradition endorse this notion. Even those that do not subscribe to the religious point of view acknowledge that the quality of love, mercy, and kindness are inherent in human nature. The ethical and aesthetic nature, according to them, is in fact traceable to the process of biological evolution of life, and in particular to the evolution of man from the animal world. As against the religious origin of the role of ethics in human relations, these sacral critical argue that religion leads to conflict and wars in the name of dogma and competing good. What is called the humanism is closely associated with this critical thinking. According to it, man by his very nature shapes his own destiny. The well known formulation of the ancient Greek thinker Protagoras, that man is the measure of all things, is regarded as expressing this humanistic viewpoint. A further development of this idea was contributed by the idea of progress, which gained greater prominence in the 18th century Europe as a result of the weakening of monopolistic hold of Christianity and the rise of modern science. Humanism of this epoch enunciated that humankind is evolving constantly towards progress stages in human thought and conduct, and that the present is better than the past and the future will be better than the present. It can be seen how humanism confirms in important sense the role of the innate goodness in the thinking and doing of humankind. Some prominent humanists held that the complete practicability of the humankind is possible by the sole effort of themselves without the intervention of any supernatural spiritual agency. That this notion has very strong links to the role of the ethical spirit is further shown. The fact that this theory is also called ethical humanism or rational humanism. Now, the next point is human nature is essentially aggressive. Paradoxically, some aspects of the religious tradition as well as the secular tradition also occupy the common ground that the human nature is inherently aggressive. In the religious tradition, that the notion exists side by side with the notion about man's benign instinct being endowed by God's grace. Religions seek to explain this coexistence of two incompatible tendencies of diverse theories. Yet, common to the notion that the human nature is prone to exhibit conflict is the concept of evil in all existence. How can evil exist at all in God's creation is the challenge all religions grapple with. The common theme in grappling with the challenge is that good and evil are in constant conflict, though the hope of all religions is that ultimately good will triumph. The concept of sin is closely connected with the notion of evil. The Semitic religion derived from the Jewish religion explain sin with the reference to the original sin that God's first human creations, Adam and Eve, committed in defying God's command, as a result of which he banished them from paradise, which can be called the realm of pure goodness, till redemption is granted by God. Hinduism, on the other hand, explains sin and suffering broadly in terms of doctrine of karma, which holds that the conduct of man and woman in their previous births determines their way of life and conduct in their current existence. As virtue and vice coexistence, humankind should strive to follow the path of virtue. This is the main theme of the Hindu tradition. Buddhism holds that desire is the source of constant human dissatisfaction, causing pain and conflict within human relations. Curbing of desire is the way to avoid pain, conflict, and suffering. It is also significant that Buddhism lays stress on non-violence as the supreme dharma or duty. The liberation of soul essentially exists in attaining a state of abstinence from desire and commitment to non-violence. Thus, we can note that the religious paradigm is greatly concerned with problems of peace and conflict. Their explanations in terms of sin, karma, desire, however, are concerned in terms of mysterious origins, not easily understandable in purely rational or secular terms. The secular theorists say that it is precisely the existence of suffering and its unexplainable nature that should make us skeptical about the role of the supernatural or God. However, the point is that even the secularists and the scientific psychologists have to explain human beings' bad propensities. The latter hold that the human mind is so constructed as it evolved that various types of instincts and urges derive or motivate human beings to external acts which we call by the names of good and bad acts. Aggression in its various forms is the result of the later condition of human life livings. The theory of evolution propounded by Charles Darwin in the 19th century has more or less demonstrably confirmed this truth. Darwin further explained the role of aggression as a necessary aspect of evolution of living species, by which some species survive and others perish. We have come to accept almost as truth his formulation that evolution progresses through the mechanism of the survival of the fittest. Aggression thus is a given condition in all evolution. One point should be noted in this context. While evolutionary theory does state that the animal nature of man is a reality, the theory also states that the very process of evolution also leads to the development of certain organs and through them certain faculties in higher living organisms, the highest among them being the human being. The development of brain and its main faculty, thinking, is perhaps the most important manifestation in this process. In its turn, this faculty also carried with it the accompanying endowment, which is the power of discrimination and the capacity for love, mercy, and compassion. Of course, the opposite qualities of hate and revenge are also part and parcel of the humankind. However, the capacity for discrimination between the good and the evil also holds out the hope that in human behavior the good will exceed the evil. The foregoing discussion makes it clear that the ideas about human nature are integrally related to the problem of the existence of peace oriented and conflict oriented conduct of men and women. While for the sake of analysis we treated the two subjects, human nature and peace and conflict, separately, in reality they are one and the same. A closely connected issue is the problem of violence as a part of human nature. Here again, there are diametrically opposed views about thinkers and experts. Some hold that by nature human being abhors violence and that violence is unnatural. This is expressed both as a statement of fact and as a normative or moral norm statement or an ought statement. That is how human nature ought to be. Thinkers belonging to the pacifist school of thought belong to this category. The emphasis on Shanti as the condition of human existence, for that matter, universal existence in the ancient Indian tradition, and the Jesus Christ preaching of non-violence, peace, and goodwill are good examples and provide the foundations for peace and non-violence. Thinkers like Mahatma Gandhi built their thought and action on these principles. On the other hand, there are thinkers that believe violence to be the natural state of the human condition. Not only that, some of them even state that violence is not only natural but that is moral also. To them, the inherent tendencies of life's process cannot but result in violence. Violence is spontaneous and is constantly manifested. The French thinker Georges Sorel is a good instance of this category of thinkers. He differed from other thinkers like Karl Marx, who also did not condemn violence as immoral, but even assigned it a positive role in bettering the human condition. For Marx, the question of morality or immorality of violence was irrelevant, since the moral category in human life is in itself a false category. Sorel differed from Marx is holding that violence in human affairs is positively moral. We refer to George Sorel to highlight the intricate way in which the concept of violence is related to the concepts of good and evil, and those of morality and immorality. Now, the third point is human nature is transformed by social relationships. In one sense, this school of thought need not be separated from the two earlier ideas and should be treated as a continuation of above two. Broadly speaking, this idea expresses the view that quite apart from the innate feature of human nature, it is the actions of men and women that give rise to the external manifestation of inherent natural tendencies in human beings. This is, of course, true, though it cannot always be the case that an action we normally regard as bad is necessarily the result of the manifestation of a bad human nature, or that a good action is due to a good aspect of human nature. Our human beings, we react to the actions of others and then assess or evaluate the actions of others and, for that matter, our own actions and designate them as good and bad. Thus, it is only when at least two human beings are involved in interaction that both the processes of evaluating actions for their good and bad consequences and of connecting them to individual human natures occur. Purely from the social relations point of view, then the human nature in the pure sense of the individual nature is at best irrelevant or at worst illusory. Does individual human nature matter in the case of a person living all alone, say, like a Robinson Crusoe, as a castaway on an island? Does being good or bad matter in such a case, his actions being of no consequence to another individual human being? How do his mental qualities like kindness, love, cruelty, etc. matter when their effect on other human beings is not there to be evaluated? Yet the objection to the above scenario suggests itself. Human nature has relevance even beyond the context of human to human interpersonal relationships. Love, kindness, cruelty, which we ordinarily designate as innate, do manifest in relationships with non-human environment. These qualities do get projected in man's dealings with animals and plants too, nor is it a sentimental imagination to talk about human beings' nature in its relationship with non-human life. Philosophers and eminent naturalists do take cognizance of the interrelationships and interactions between humankind and human beings and their non-human colleagues on this planet, drawing very relevant conclusions about the nature of human nature and even about the nature of the animal world. Here we want to wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.